Welcome, everybody. Today, all eyes are on Washington, D.C., all eyes are on the United States. It's Inauguration Day. It's the day when Joe Biden will be sworn into office. Welcome to our inauguration event. I'm Stormy Annika Milsner. I'm with the Aspen Institute, and I will lead you through our event today. So this is the 10th and final event of our Road to Election and Beyond series, and it's been an outstanding cooperation with 13 partners who are very committed to the transatlantic relationship and who want to send a strong signal to transatlantic for transatlantic solidarity. So thanks to all our partners who have been involved so far and who are with us, at least virtually today, again. Thanks to the Aspen Institute, to the American Academy in Berlin. Thank you to the American Chamber of Commerce in Germany. Thank you to the Atlantikbrücke, the American Council on Germany, Deutsche Atlantische Gesellschaft, Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, Friedrich-Naumann-Stiftung für die Freiheit, die Hans-Seidel-Stiftung. Thank you to Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung, das Amerika-Haus NRW, Amerika-Haus München, and the German Marshall Fund. Thank you to all of us who have traveled this road together until today, to this very day. Hello to all of you who have joined us virtually, to our guests. And please follow us and ask also questions. We want to make this interactive. So use Twitter and use our hashtag R2EN. So this is our old Road to Election hashtag, and many of you already know this. So this event series would also not have been possible without the support of the House in which we are currently today, the Landesvertretung Baden-Württemberg state representation in Berlin. Thank you very, very much for allowing us, having reported from this very premise on election night, and thank you so much for having us today. We appreciate this, especially because we know that it's really hard to do events like this during the corona pandemic. So thank you so much letting us be here in person, live, with all the safety which is necessary during these hard times. So it is a very great honor to hand over to, well, first welcome and then hand over to the state representative, Dr. Andreas Baumann, who will also welcome us virtually. Thank you so much again for having us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Dr. Miltner. Thank you very much for your introduction. Dear viewers from the transatlantic community, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to extend a warm welcome to you and to all the participants and listeners at the Landesvertretung Baden-Württemberg. We are very pleased to have the Aspen Institute as our guest once again on this special day. Thank you for the great cooperation in the past several years. Today ends a difficult time for the United States of America and for the transatlantic relations. Today, the new president of the United States will give his inauguration speech, and we will listen to Joe Biden's address to analyze in two panels. In the past few years, we almost got used to Donald Trump's daily strange tweets and fatal decisions. We all still reeling from the shock of the storming of the Capitol on January 6th, when supporters of Donald Trump attempted to prevent the formal certification of the results of the presidential election. This riot and violent attack will be remembered for a long time. Here in Germany, we are facing similar problems when in August 2020, demonstrators against the state's corona policy broke through a barrier and tried to storm Reichstag building in Berlin. So it would be too easy and even dangerous to think this is an USA problem. Those developments can be observed in all over the world, also here in Europe, even not yet to this extent. Here, two democratic institutions and processes are being questioned and the society is split. The sometimes harsh but unavoidable interventions due to the corona pandemic are intensifying these problems. Conspiracy theorists, as well as right-wing extremists, Reichsbürger, and other enemies of democracy, are searching supporters mainly via social media and messenger services. Therefore, Europe and Germany should perceive the escalation of violence in Washington and see it was a warning signal, resist the beginnings. In the USA, the new president must now bring peace back to his country, politically and economically. In a four-point agenda for his presidency, Joe Biden has announced the reconciliation of the nation, the containment of the pandemic, the creation of jobs, and the fight against climate change as the main goals. The US is a strong democracy, and I hope for all Americans that this will be proved again now. Of course, we would like to see the transatlantic partner in Washington, who together with the EU will follow the path of the multilateral politics. This is important for our economy, but of course, for the US and world economy, which needs clear legal relationships and no trade barriers. The USA is although the most important international trading partner for Baden-Württemberg and an important location for our companies. Baden-Württemberg is home to almost 280 American companies. Companies like IBM, Hewlett-Packard, or John Deere shape the economy in Baden-Württemberg, just as Bosch, ZF, Trumpf, and SAP shape the economy in the USA. We need the USA to rejoin in the fight against climate change and as a partner in the International Climate Agreement. And there are many in the USA who are very committed to climate protection. I'm very grateful to former Governor Jerry Brown and my Prime Minister Winfried Kretschmann, who founded the Under 2 Coalition, a regional coalition for climate protection. In this coalition, several US federal states have continued to work on the climate goals even during Trump presidency. Today, more than 220 regions are members of the Under 2 Coalition, which makes up a third of the world economy. California and Baden-Württemberg are among the economically strongest regions in the world. Those regions show that climate protection and good economic development are two sides of the same coin. I'm very pleased that Joe Biden announced to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. Now we look forward to a competition regarding to the best climate protection concepts and the best sustainability technologies. This announcement gives us hope that one of the key players in the fight against climate change would become a strong ally again. Ladies and gentlemen, the expectations of the new president have seldom been as high as they have been for Joe Biden. His inauguration marks a turning point after 4 years of conflict in the transatlantic relationship. But nobody in Brussels, in the capitals of the EU member states, is naive enough to believe that European-US relations can simply be rolled back to pre-Trump times. One thing is clear: transatlantic cooperation cannot be taken for granted. The European Commission under President Ursula von der Leyen, as well as Council President Charles Michel, have prepared discussion papers entitled New EU-US Agenda for Global Change and Renewing EU-US Relations. Now, however, action must follow for joint trade, digitalization, climate protection, security, and space. Biden's signals are very optimistic. Whether closer cooperation actually works depends on Europe and therefore also on Germany. After 4 years of Donald Trump, the new president must first of all focus on political and economic issues. The EU should quickly take the initiative For a new cooperation, we should find answers to a whole range of questions in order to continue to be a central actor in international politics. Russia pursues a sometimes aggressive power politics directly on our borders. The civil wars in Syria and Libya are still unsolved. China is expanding militarily and economically, investing in European infrastructure and trying to drive a wedge between EU member states and the USA. Together with the United States, we must find instruments and ways to deal with both without slamming the door for reliable cooperation. This requires more cohesion and better coordination between Europe and the Western Alliance. The European capitals, Brussels and Washington, need to work more closely together and present a common front in more areas. From climate protection and respect for human rights to data protection, digitization, and the fight against pandemics, we have to coordinate and develop joint solutions. Last but not least, the resumption of the TTIP negotiations and the overdue conclusion of a transatlantic trade agreement would send a clear signal, especially against the background of the world's largest free trade area initiated by China with 14 Asia countries. The world needs a reliable, capable Western alliance to ensure peace and freedom, security and prosperity. American and European interests may be different, but there's no difference in our common values and political culture. Dear guests, I look forward to your discussions before and after the inauguration speech of the new President of the United States of America and wish us all an interesting and enlightening evening. I will now return the floor to Dr. Mildner. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you so much for this very, very strong call for strong transatlantic relationship and also this enthusiasm. I think it sets the stage very well for the day we have today. And to get us even more into the mood, we now would like to show you an interview with a true transatlanticist, which we recorded yesterday, with Catherine Kluwer-Eschbruck, and the interview was conducted by Laura Senftleben from the Aspen Institute, without whom we wouldn't be here today either, because she took care of all the technical surroundings here. So let's see Laura and let's see Catherine.
Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our transatlantic live from all around Europe and the United States, hopefully. My name is Laura Senftleben, and I am a program officer with the Aspen Institute Germany in Berlin. And I'm thrilled to welcome Catherine Kluwer-Eschbruck, Catherine, for a pre-assessment of Joe Biden's inaugural address. Catherine is a German and American national. She has had a long-standing career as a journalist and a civil servant, and she is now the founding executive director of the Future Diplomacy Project, as well as the executive director of the Project on Europe and the Transatlantic Relationship at the Harvard Kennedy School in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Where she is tuning in from today, Catherine, we're honored to have you. Welcome.
I'm thrilled to be with my friends at Aspen, and I wish I could cut myself in half so I could be with you in Berlin and in Washington and in Cambridge all at the same time. But I'm glad we are connected virtually today.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Catherine, let's dive right into our first question. We're looking at a somewhat unprecedented presidential transition phase, and it feels like the whole world is watching what is happening in the United States, not only today, but has been watching for the past several weeks and months. Why do you think it is important for us Germans and Europeans to follow this year's inauguration process so closely?
Well, I think what we're expecting in Europe, and frankly, what most of the country is expecting, is a real break with the last 4 dark years of Donald Trump. If you think about the inauguration 4 years ago, the president ended his remarks by warning of American carnage. It was certainly in my lived history of American democracy, the darkest inauguration speech we have ever heard. And, you know, here we are 4 years on, in the midst of American carnage, carnage that this president brought on the United States in his poor handling of the pandemic and the associated crisis in the American economy, in the way that he has run roughshod over all of America's democratic institutions. And so Inauguration Day, as we traditionally define it, is always a point of departure. It sets the tone, it sets the vision for a new administration. It is designed to bring Americans together, which we won't have tomorrow. And you will have all seen, I think, really the moving pictures of the 20,000 American flags on the mall representing all of us that can't be together as Americans celebrating this milestone in our democracy at the birthplace, frankly, of our modern democracy, not in Philadelphia, but in Washington, D.C. And so there's always a lot of symbolism in this act. There's pathos, as the Europeans would probably define it, but it's also the beginning of a new era, I think, in American politics. And I think this is no more true tomorrow than ever before, because we have experienced these dark days for American democracy over every single day of the last 4 years.
Thank you. And what do you think will be the main themes of this new era? What will be the main themes of Joe Biden's inaugural address? What will be his main message, maybe even?
He said in the past, after his election, but also all through the campaign, that he wants to be America's president. And that is the similar vein of thought that we heard from Barack Obama. So in that sense, there is some continuity there between the administration he served first as a vice president and now an administration that he will steer together with Kamala Harris, again, the first African-American, Indian-American vice president in the history of the United States, and the first female vice president of the United States. So I do think, in as much as this will be a speech to try to bring America together, to underline what unites and not divides us, it will map the challenges ahead. It will map some of the solutions that this president plans to install immediately on day one in office. There are many promises he made on the campaign trail, which I think through a combination of executive power and a shifting of some of the congressional majorities, he can push right away. But above all, this will be a speech about vision. This will be a speech about hope. This will be a speech about the potential of American democracy. And I think it's worth spending a little time on this, because America is poised to be the first truly multiracial, multi-ethnic, multinational, if you think about nations of origin and the United States as an immigration country, superpower in the world. And not, in a far out time, in the next 20, 30 years. And I see this administration, even in its personnel composition, some of the leaders in the administration, as real signifiers of how America is changing demographically, socially, and economically. And those were the factors that were frightening to the Trump supporters, that they tried with every part of their might, political, and as we saw on January 6th, physical, to overturn over the last 4 years. And they haven't been successful. And that speaks to the resilience of American democracy, even though it was so painfully attacked from the inside over these last 4 years. And so I think this will be a message of forward-based thinking, of visionary thinking, of hope, and of underlying the potential that rests deeply, I think, in American democracy.
Wow, thank you so much, Catherine. Thank you so much for your assessment. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you to all. Here's to a new 4 years ahead and a new era for transatlantic relations.
So thank you so much to Laura and Catherine for setting further the stage. And now I'm very, very thrilled to introduce to you Terry Martin. He is senior anchor at Deutsche Welle. And if there's one voice here in Berlin who to turn to if you want to understand what's going on in the US and the transatlantic relationship, it's certainly Terry. And I'm listening always to you religiously. So it's great that you are here today. Thank you so much for moderating our event.
Stormy, thank you so much for that kind introduction. I don't think I really know everything that's going on right now in the United States or even here in Germany, but I'm doing my best all along to find out more. And I think that the people who are tuning in today are going to get a very good understanding of what is expected of the Biden presidency from this side of the Atlantic, and also some views from the United States as well. So thank you very much for those kind words. This is Inauguration Day in America. It's a very special day always when a new president is being sworn in as the leader of the United States. But today is important for a number of reasons that we've already talked about in some of the introductions. Today we're going to be hearing Joe Biden's inauguration speech, and it should give us some clues as to what his vision is for America and how he expects to engage with the rest of the world. It's being closely watched here in Europe, of course, by the Aspen Institute and all of the organizations whose logos you see behind me. They're keenly interested in that, and you're going to be hearing from some of the representatives of those organizations in just a moment. We'll be following Joe Biden's speech live, and we're going to frame it with two discussions involving about 12 different speakers. I'm going to open up the first one in just a moment, but these speakers should give us a very good understanding of their hopes, their fears, their expectations of the Biden-Harris presidency, and should, because of their spectrum of expertise, we should get a very well-rounded view. So, without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists. We have just under an hour for this first panel, and then we'll cut over to the live feed of Joe Biden's speech. So, first of all, I'm going to introduce 7 panelists, so bear with me. There's quite a few introductions here, and then we're going to enter into the question phase. Knut Detlefsen is the representative to the United States and Canada for the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. That's the political think tank of Germany's Social Democratic Party, the SPD, and he joins us from Washington. Markus Faber is a member of the European Parliament representing Bavaria's CSU party. While focusing on economic and monetary affairs in Parliament, he also serves as chair of the Hans Seidel Foundation. That's the political think tank associated with Germany's CSU party in Bavaria. Bastian Hermansen is executive director of the North America office of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, the political think tank of Germany's Green Party. He too is based in the U.S. Capitol. Michael Link is a member of the German Parliament, the Bundestag, for the Free Democratic Party. He's the European Affairs spokesperson for the FDP's parliamentary group and serves on the board of his party's political think tank, the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. Dr. Mareike Olberg is a senior fellow at the Asia program of the German Marshall Fund of the United States and co-leader of the Stockholm China Forum. She recently co-authored a book called Hidden Hand, How the Communist Party of China is Reshaping the World. That's in German and in English. We also have Anahita Thomas. She's a trade lawyer and partner in the international trade practice Baker McKenzie. She heads up their international trade practice here in Germany. She's also a member of the board of the Atlantic Brücke, an association promoting German-American understanding going all the way back to the 1950s, I believe, that organization. And Dr. Maike Zwingenberger is executive director of the Bavarian Center for Transatlantic Relations. She directs a broad cultural and political program at America House Munich, and is a consultant for multiple American Studies programs here in Germany. Now, I mention these biographies in detail because I'm going to draw on different details of those biographies to give you an idea of what kind of picture we're getting of the Biden presidency, what sort of expectations in a very rounded way. And I'll begin with Knut Detlefsen, the representative to the U.S. and Canada of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. Now, Mr. Detlefsen, I presume you're with us. I think I can see you on a screen here just off to my right. You can wave if you see me, and I'll pick you out on there you are. Hello. Good to see you all. You know Washington well. You studied there. You served as a foreign policy advisor to Senator Dianne Feinstein, I understand, and you've witnessed the last 2 years of the Trump presidency up close. One could say that you have your finger on the pulse of American democracy, so to speak. So let me begin by asking you, how healthy is American democracy as the 46th president takes office?
Well, thank you, first of all, Terry, for asking me, and also thank you for Aspen Institute for having me in this conversation and having the Friedrich Ebert Foundation in this conversation. Of course, not only I think the democracy is in crisis, but the whole society is in crisis. And I would call the US, as Joe Biden takes it over today, a nervous nation, which has undergone, I mean, the most divisive presidency, the terrible 4 years, which were pointed out in this analysis by Kathleen Cleaver-Ashton. And of course, you can say that this democracy, well, is in dire straits and troubled waters. And the reason why Joe Biden got elected is because of his promise and the trust of the majority of the American people that he will do better and that things will get better. That doesn't mean that they will be all good, but they will get better and that they will be different, that he will restore, as he said himself, dignity in the White House and will bring back the soul of the nation. So, but obviously that is a very difficult task. It is aspirational and it will to be done, I think, by very realistic and doable policies that will make a difference to the people that feel somewhat disenfranchised or very much disenfranchised in this country. And so I would say, well, there is a lot of opportunity, and it is a moment where it is now about us and not about the narcissism of a person who, at least in his final days, behaved like a tyrant and well, even in a way, at least tried to stage a self-coup. And obviously, the last 11 weeks between November 3rd and today, I feel very difficult to say the least. I would say they were troubling, and in particular, January 6th, I was on that day in front of the Capitol. I mean, we're shocking. I mean, they were shocking as 9/11, if you think about it, and it changes something.
Okay. A nervous nation. Joe Biden is taking over there as president. Markus Faber, you have a unique perspective on our panel today, not so much because you represent Bavaria, a political party that exists really only in Bavaria, the regional sister party of Chancellor Merkel's CDU party, of course, but because you've been a member of the European Parliament for over 25 years, if I'm counting that up correctly. So you see America, at least in part, through a European lens. How would you describe the transatlantic relationship today, having observed it through that lens for so long, compared to, say, 5, 10, or 15 years ago today?
Yeah, thank you very much. That is, of course, a difficult question, but I think that is the question. And this morning, I'm in Brussels at the moment as we have a plenary session as European Parliament. This morning, our Commission President was in the plenary delivering a speech on what's happening today in the United States. And of course, a lot of enthusiasm is over there. And we should, of course, not overestimate the new possibilities or to come back to the old possibilities. But on the other hand, we should not underestimate that at the moment, this country is divided in a way I've never seen before. And I did not live for a long time in the States as a student, yes, but been very, very often regularly in the United States, having a lot of contacts. It's so divided as it was never before. So he has, firstly, not to act what's happening in the world. He has firstly to act what's happening in the United States. And then if you follow the agenda of former democratic presidents, I think there is a line visible, and we should be aware of that the United States started a long time ago asking us in Europe to take over responsibility for our neighborhood and not always wait and ask what the United States are doing. That was during the Clinton administration. That was, of course, during the Obama administration. And that has to be continued. that we have to take care on our neighborhood as Europeans and get adult in foreign affairs policies. On the other hand, and that was already mentioned by the State Minister of Baden-Württemberg, the question of climate, for example, how to save this planet, will be fully different than it was the last 4 years, but in a continuity, what we saw already on the Obama administration. So I hope that we can come back to that. And honestly, the development that the United States are taking more and more interest on the Pacific area is not a new experience. And of course, for economical reasons, the challenge coming from China will be on the top of the economical agenda of the new administration. And Europe will not be the front runner in the interest. And even that is a development we saw or in a long line over more than a decade. So therefore, I think we will come back to better relations, and I think we will come back to a good way of cooperation in a lot of areas. But the fundamental problems, which I try to describe, is only a few ideas which have been established even a long time ago, especially during Clinton and Obama administration, if I pick up the Democratic presidents, will continue. And that, of course, will be the challenge for us in Europe, where we have to deliver answers and can't wait till on the other side of the Atlantic, someone is giving us an answer on that.
Mr. Faber, thank you. Bastian Hermansen, I want to bring you in now and ask you to pick up a little bit on something that we just heard regarding the nostalgia that exists in Europe for the Obama era, or at least for a time when transatlantic ties were not as strained as under Donald Trump. Now, you work in Washington with the think tank connected with the Green Party, which many say has a good shot of becoming part of this next government in Germany. Transatlantic affairs is your specialty. What are you expecting from the change of administration in Washington? Do you think that Joe Biden can reinvigorate transatlantic relations?
Thank you very much, Terry. And indeed, I do. And I think we'll start to hear that in his speech, which will not just have a radically different tone if I think back to 4 years ago, but also will be the beginning of a radically different presidency in substance. Maybe just let me give you 3 examples. You know, I remember 4 years ago, Donald Trump focused on the message of "I alone can fix it." And what we'll hear today, I'm sure, from Joe Biden will be instead the message, "We can do this together." Instead of diminishing the citizenry to an anonymous mass whose job it is to praise their leader, Joe Biden will empower citizens and view every citizen as a teammate in democracy. And this will be an important element of stabilizing democracy and also starting a transatlantic dialogue on how to stabilize and strengthen our democracies. Secondly, what Donald Trump's slogan was "Make America Great Again," I think Joe Biden's unofficial motto of his whole presidency is "Make America Compassionate Again." His presidency will focus on the disenfranchised and dealing with inequality at home and abroad, because to make things better, and I think that's true on both sides of the Atlantic, to shape a more perfect union, we have to face the deficits of democracy today, from racism to poverty to unequal access to education. And thirdly, when the last years we heard about America first as a principle in international politics, Joe Biden's theme will be America Unites. His administration is guided and will be guided by a spirit of cooperation instead of confrontation. And for the EU, this is truly a sea change. We are going to go from being the punching bag of the US administration to being the most important strategic partner. And that's a historic opportunity, especially if I think of the global challenges that are truly urgent and cannot wait another couple of years. Climate change, first and foremost, we cannot afford to waste another couple of years. And Biden and Harris have an ambitious plan that truly will be able to chart a good course on and tackle this challenge. Nuclear proliferation, digital governance, of course, the pandemic, there is a lot to do. So I think it's an historic opportunity. It really will be a sea change, and I'm very optimistic for the years ahead.
Thank you very much. Let's bring in Michael Link here now. He's a member of the German Parliament, deeply involved in foreign policy and European affairs. You've been very active in multilateral organizations like the OSCE, a number of multilateral organizations. I wanted to ask you, specifically about that, because we keep hearing about the we versus the I that we expect to be coming from Joe Biden. Those multilateral institutions suffered greatly under Donald Trump. Do you think that Joe Biden is going to be able to pursue a revival of those multilateral institutions, or has too much damage been done?
Okay, thank you, Terry. That is certainly one of the most central questions we have to face right now, because indeed, as you said it, Donald Trump, he was a president who was a challenge not only to the European Union but to the United Nations, and even to NATO. I mean, he was a lone decision maker. He did not consult with allies. Joe Biden will be a president who will consult with allies. He will agree with allies always. He will be, of course, a president who is really putting forward also U.S. interests, but in a spirit of partnership. And that is the key opportunity we have. Therefore, as a European Union, we should not think about now confronting our U.S. partners with an untimely debate on autonomy and sovereignty. We need to strengthen the EU. We need to be decision makers in the EU. But the more we are decision makers, the more we can be also partners on a level playing field with the US. And that is exactly what Joe Biden will expect from us. He wants to see the European Union as a decision maker on a level playing field with the US, and he will see us as a true partner and not as Donald Trump did it, somebody who always tried to split the European Union. And let me say on a very personal note, because I had the privilege and the honor to serve as a chief observer for the electoral observation for the United States, I was very glad to see that this, unlike a lot of people said in the EU, this is not at all a failed state, but it's a functioning democracy, and where the challenge from the very inside of the White House, of course, was countered by the judiciary, by the US Congress, and in the end also by the US voters. So I think we see a functioning democracy in the making. And even at 79 years old, you can be a very young president. That's what we see in Joe Biden. So I'm looking forward to a very true partner in Joe Biden and his administration, especially for us Europeans.
Thank you, Mr. Link. You've touched on some issues that I'm sure that our next speaker is also going to be reflecting on. Marika Olberg, Dr. Olberg, you're an expert on China, the country dominating foreign policy debates on both sides of the Atlantic. There's talk of, indeed, systemic rivalry with China, but the EU and the US have not exactly been coordinating policy when it comes to China, and Germany is partly responsible for that, it must be said. Do you think there will be more coordination on China policy between the European Union and the US, particularly in light of the new investment agreement that was just agreed between China and the EU?
Thanks, Terry. Despite the investment agreement that the EU did at the last minute last year, I remain fairly optimistic that there will be more coordination between the United States and Europe on China policy. On China policy from the United States, what we can expect is continued dedication to the line that was started under Donald Trump, even though not the methods. So ideally from the United States, we will be seeing a similar approach on China that will continue to push back against China. The difference is, of course, that now it becomes possible again for the United States and Europe to work together again, because that is one of the key aspects that the Biden administration, or the people that are responsible for Asia policy in the Biden administration, have of course pointed out as the big flaw in Donald Trump's approach, like that there was no attempt at coordination. That doesn't mean that there's going to be, the same policies on both sides, but we will, I am confident, see more coordination on the basics of policy, like tech policy, pushing back on human rights. Now, it's unfortunate, and many in the United States pointed out that, the European Commission pushing through the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment with China. Obviously, China had a huge interest in pushing this through right before the Biden administration comes into power, simply because that was seen as a good chance to push this in before there is a chance to coordinate. That was not ideal. I think, and obviously many on the U.S. side have pointed that out. I think there's a certain willingness on the U.S. side to push ahead on this cooperation anyway, to say, okay, fine, you did this to, come up to the same level where the United States was with its phase 1 trade deal with China. So as long as, we're willing to keep working with you and just say, this is your affair, we don't like it, but we're not gonna get involved to try to push back. So I'm hopeful that there will still be many opportunities to work together, even though it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a piece of cake, but at least compared to the Trump administration, there will be some more willingness also on the European side to coordinate and work together.
Not going to be a piece of cake. I think that sums that up pretty well. Thank you very much for now. Anahita Thomas, you're a trade lawyer and a partner in the international law practice, Baker McKenzie. You head up their international trade practice here in Germany. You're also, a member of the board of the Atlantic Brücke. So you deal very much with what's going on in terms of trade between Europe and the United States, particularly Germany and the United States. Donald Trump had a huge impact on that trading relationship. What can we reasonably expect to change with the Biden administration in terms of trade policy?
Thank you very much, Terry. One could even say it can only get better. So trade policy has definitely been a very challenging one in the past 4 years, from being called a trade adversary in the European Union to punitive tariffs when it comes to steel and aluminium, threats in relation to cars, EU cars. So we had a full range of challenging matters when it comes to trade. So I look very optimistically into the Biden for 4 years and maybe longer. One point that will definitely has to raise is the WTO point, whether we will see the blockage removed in that regard. But we are also hopeful that for once and all, we will not talk about punitive tariffs on European cars any longer. We will, of course, see domestic pressure when it comes to international supply chains. President-elect Biden has various times talked about build back better. So we will see manufacturing coming back to the United States, or reshoring at least. When it comes to trade relationships, of course, there is talk and hopes in relation to a TTIP 2.0. I would be a little bit skeptical at this point in time, because the issues, as Mr. Ferber noted in his note, have not been resolved. To the contrary, we have been seeing these issues already under Obama, and these issues have escalated further. So I think we have to try to find new ways. For example, what we could do is to look at specific sectors. But if you look at TTIP as a whole, the issues around agriculture, foods, all these kind of issues are still on the table. So we have to be very diplomatic in our approach. But I think we should be ambitious nevertheless. Just a TTIP 2.0. We have to be realistic, and we also have to look at ourselves too, because as you know, the political elite in Germany has not been pro TTIP all the time either. So we have to look at ourselves and what we expect from this transatlantic relationship and what we are able to do as a compromise. Overall, we will definitely not see executive orders, economic sanctions implemented overnight and tweeted instead of, multilateral discussions, close collaboration with the European Union. So this is, I think, from a politician with more than 5 decades of experience, I definitely will expect a much more smooth and collaborative future when it comes to trade policy.
Smoother and more collaborative. I think a lot of people are looking for that actually on both sides of the Atlantic. Thank you for now. And finally, I'd like to bring in Dr. Maike Zwingenberger. Dr. Zwingenberger, you are devoted to cultivating cultural and academic ties between the US and Germany. Tell us, how did the Trump presidency impact your work, your cause, if you will? And do you think that cultivating transatlantic ties, particularly among young people, will become easier under President Biden, or is the skepticism now so deep that the interest is beginning to fade?
Wow, okay, thanks, Terry. How much time do we have? Because that is a rather broad question that you asked, or a whole range of questions, I would say. Just quickly about the Trump administration time and German-American relations in the last 4 years, from my perspective. I think that on one side, I have to admit actually that during the Trump administration, we had a lot of interest, and we had a lot of people participating in our events and debating very strongly all the things that happened. So there was a lot of interest, but as you just mentioned, also skepticism grew over time, of course. And on a practical level, it was really hard to work together because as an institution, you see that wonderful America House, we have a strong Bavarian presence here this afternoon with Mr. Ferber and the Munich America House. But we used to work together very tight and efficiently with the US Embassy and the US Consulate on cultural programs. They help us bring over great exhibitions and also in the context of science, bring great scholars that we couldn't really afford usually. And that has been really hard over the last 4 years because we just couldn't agree on who we would invite, for example, to debate climate change issues and other important topics. So I think that the broad Atlantic that is between our two nations has actually meant a long stretch and distance over the last 4 years. So in this sense, I'm really optimistic that it will be much easier to work together in the future with the Biden administration. And I'm also optimistic because we have seen some picks that Joe Biden suggested for his administration that I think are very promising. And I would just quickly like to focus on domestic politics again, because of course, we cover a lot of transatlantic issues in foreign policy contexts, like security issues, climate change, also trade issues. But I have to say that Germans are also very interested in the situation for Americans, just in general, all over the country. In rural Michigan, in some areas where there had been a strong German immigration, and so family ties are there, or connections via the military. So with Susan Rice, for example, the pick for Domestic Policy Council that Joe Biden has announced already, I think Susan Rice is a person, she is familiar to us from the Barack Obama administration, and she's a great pick to deal with important issues, the domestic issues, but she's also a person that will bring some hope and emotions and some connections to Germans. So that is very promising. Another pick is Eric Lander, who is going to be the science advisor. And this is also something new that Joe Biden suggested, that he would need somebody advising his cabinet on scientific issues. So I see there's a lot of issues that come up that are new somehow, and advisors, and the administration, I think, will be very interesting for Germans to see how these people, all the different voices, the new voices that appear, how they will influence policies of Joe Biden administration. And I think with those picks also comes a hope for reform. We talked a lot about the certain reform elements that the US needs at the moment, but I think from a German perspective, people will really be concentrated on these reforms to see how well the US democracy is actually functioning, and if that element, that moment of reform will be applied, then there's also hope from the German side, I would say.
Okay, so the interest in the United States remains. It has been sustained throughout the Trump period in office, and you expect it to increase perhaps because of what is going on within Joe Biden's administration. We have about 20 minutes left before I hand back over to Stormy. I'm hoping to bring all of you in maybe once or twice, so I'm just going to ask you to try to keep your replies brief if you can. I'm going to go back to the beginning of the panel, to Knut Detlefsen. First of all, Knut Detlefsen, are you in Washington right now?
I'm in Washington. I'm on the 15th Street in the office of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, very close to the Capitol, very close to the White House, a little bit further away from the Capitol.
You've been there now for 2 years, but you've seen Washington in many situations over the years when you studied at Georgetown and you've been there, I presume, many, many times. But I wanted to ask you for the mood. You mentioned nervous nation. What are you anticipating now that we have a new president coming into the White House today and the old president leaving without recognizing the result of the election and without congratulating his successor or meeting him on his way out? What does this say to you about what we can expect in terms of Joe Biden's efforts to revive the soul of the nation, as you said?
Well, I expect that he will, basically he did this through already his campaign, the way he conducted his campaign, that it was a campaign that was very convincing because he always portrayed himself as the better president, as the president that is already trying through the way he speaks and through basically the problems he discusses, that he will be a president that really deals with the realities, with the problems that people face in their daily lives. And that is I think the most important thing to do to, unite the nation if you want to. Of course, there's also limits to that. As Joe Biden himself said, it's not in a sky, it's not just like a dream, it is something that has to be realistically done. And by the program that he basically, or the plan that he has laid out in the first 100 days, he tackles the most important problems that we as people that are living here are facing, which is the pandemic. We have reached the sobering number of 400,000 people that have died because of COVID-19. The pandemic is due to the lack of attention by the previous administration, has gotten completely out of control. And the US, and in particular people that have lower incomes and are less privileged, have a very difficult economic time right now, you could say. They're really facing hardship. And many people don't know how to meet. And that's why I think also the way he's trying to deal with the economic problems by extending unemployment benefits, basically, at least that's the plan until September. And he will need, of course, the support of the Congress, which he has, but I hope that also at least part of the Republican Party will wake up and realize that they need to prove that they can govern and that they can solve problems and not only block important policy initiatives. And I think there is some hope for that, and it's not just, that is not just aspirational, because you see also that there is probably a change of mind by some people, that even people that have supported Donald Trump all along, but realized that that was maybe not the best idea that they've had. So there is a lot of opportunity and chance for Joe Biden, but it is a very difficult moment. And I must say, the last few days in the city felt like the city is holding its breath. And today, I mean, I biked to the city. I do that every day also to check the mood. It is very empty, you know.
It must be a frightening situation with 25,000 National Guard troops there. It's very hard to imagine what it must be like under such a tight security lockdown surrounding an inauguration never seen before. It must be a very, very strange and perhaps disturbing sight. Markus Ferber, you talked about the United States looking to Europe over the years and hoping that Europe would begin to take on some more responsibility for its own neighborhood. With Joe Biden coming into the office, those wishes, I think, will remain. You mentioned that. But how do you expect him to articulate that? And given what we heard today from the High Commissioner for Foreign Affairs for the European Commission and from Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, she made some very welcoming remarks towards Joe Biden today. What do you, how do you see this unfolding? How do you see Europe and the U.S. beginning to reconcile these differences that have been exacerbated during the Trump administration?
Yeah, I think that is a very, very important question, and thanks for that, Terry. As I'm in Brussels, and I was witness of the NATO summit, where really we saw that even NATO could have come to an end, as Trump was really squeezing the Europeans in an edge where no one felt very comfortable. I think we will see, firstly, that, of course, the Biden administration is more favorable and more understanding how NATO functions and what are the European demands there. On the other hand, of course, the 2% goal was not an invention by Mr. Trump or the Trump administration, and the United States will come back on that as well under the Biden administration, and that means as well take more responsibility. That is the number one. I think Ms. Thomas has mentioned the trade issue, and I fully agree. We should continue. Maybe a TTIP minus would be the best approach after the lessons we learned. But we have something more than we have now negotiated with China. So we have something with China, investment deal, which has to be ratified, but we have nothing with the United States. I think that is not the way it should work. So therefore, we have to come back to those initiatives. So a TTIP minus, I think, would be the right approach.
Okay.
And certainly, of course, we have to look to the other neighbor of Europe, which is on the eastern side, and that is Russia. And as we have a lot of things which are concerning me at the moment and us in Europe as well, therefore we have to find a common ground with the United States how to deal with Russia in the years to come.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Bastian Hermansen, by the way, we only have about, if I get everyone in, we're going to have about 2 minutes left for each of you, so I'd please again ask you to be brief. Going back to what you mentioned, the I versus the we, we can expect a more collaborative, inclusive approach coming from the Biden administration compared to Donald Trump. How open to accepting Joe Biden's offers do you think that Trump supporters will be? How difficult will it be to cross that ideological divide that has so deeply divided the nation?
Well, I think reconciliation always takes two sides, right? Joe Biden has made clear that his hand is outstretched for people that have different political views and opinions, people that didn't vote for him, as long as they stand on the ground of the Constitution and are not anti-democratic. But it takes two to tango, and it takes someone to pick up that outstretched hand. And so I think the onus for true societal and political reconciliation in the United States falls a lot more on the Republican Party in particular. I think that is what will really decide whether Biden can succeed, and in the end, where democracy goes in the United States. And so we should not lose sight of that. Biden will do what he can, but it takes more than that. It is now up to the Republican Party to really decide and think where it wants to go post-Trump. Does it want to be an anti-democratic party, or does it want to be, with a small d, a democratic party that believes in compromise again, in cooperation and in American democracy?
Thank you. Michael Link, you talked a bit about skepticism towards the United States that has hardened here in Germany. You also said that that Europe shouldn't burden the Biden administration with too much talk of strategic autonomy. I realize we're bouncing around between domestic and international affairs here, but from an international point of view, what can Europe, what can Germany offer to the Biden administration to help repair some of the damage that may have been done during the Trump administration?
I think a good starting point for Germany, Terry, would be that we show the courage to reconsider such projects as Nord Stream 2. I think independent of whether there will be a Nord Stream 2 in the end, the way how it has been done did do a lot of damage to the EU inside and also to transatlantic relations. Because whenever we deal with Russia or China, it is important to do it together as allies. In the EU, when we speak to Russia, we should first speak to Poland, to the Baltic states and the Scandinavians. And when we deal with Russia, we should also first talk, of course, to the US. And therefore, I'm not sure, I'm not totally convinced, Marcus, please excuse me, but I'm at the very end of last year, the thing to think it was
having a little trouble with your audio link, Mr. Link. Sorry, I'm going to just move on. Perhaps we'll be able to come back to you, but it's a little tricky. Anyway, thank you very much for your points. Quickly, Dr. Mareike Oldbach, you mentioned that about more coordination on China policy between Europe and the United States. We just, with the outgoing Trump administration, we heard his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, call what China is doing in its northwest province with the Uyghurs an example of genocide. We're talking about crimes against humanity. The incoming designated Secretary of State for Joe Biden has also said he could imagine connecting with that idea. Do you think that on human rights, the EU and the US will take a common line regarding China?
It's certainly something that I'm hoping for. Again, it's not going to be easy. There is a lot of pushback for anything that is about holding our, for instance, our own companies to account on, for instance, being complicit in any of these human rights violations in China. Nonetheless, there has been quite a bit of interest in the European Union about focusing on human rights. In fact, if you look at some, public opinion surveys, you find that while Americans are mostly concerned about national security regarding China, Europeans are by and large more concerned about the human rights situation in China. We've seen some initiative to start pushing through, to start looking at, what are our supply chains, what do we have sufficient export controls. So I think even if there obviously the United States and the European Union can't come up with common legislation, I think there is quite a bit of room for coordination, for looking at best practices, for consulting between different parliaments, between the different governments. So I think this is definitely an area where I am hopeful that Europe will take advantage of this and will actually be on board with the United States on this, because it's the right thing to do.
Be very interesting to watch that. Anahita Thomas, you focus very much in your law practice on dealing with global investigations, also with the question of sanctions. During the Trump administration, sanctions have become a major issue in relation to Iran, and they've also been, not to mention Russia, there's more policy coordination there, but there's also talk about Nord Stream and what sort of sanctions might be coming in association with that. Do you see a relaxation coming in terms of sanctions in policy between the Biden administration and Europe, and particularly Germany?
So Vice President-elect Harris has noted in her debate with Pence that they want to kind of have some kind of back to the JCPOA, so the Iran nuclear deal. So I think that this will be on President Biden's agenda. Whether we will call it and dub it JCPOA or whether we find a new name for it is a different question, of course. But I think that this is something where President Biden will work on and build on what President Obama has achieved. When it comes to Nord Stream 2, I think that is a very challenging topic. Of course, we in the European Union are not happy about any kind of so-called secondary sanctions implemented by the United States, and we will continue through all diplomatic means, and sometimes by some kind of regulatory means like the EU blocking regulation to counteract those. So that will be a very challenging road ahead when it comes to Nord Stream 2. When it comes to Russia, of course, I think the European Union is kind of reluctant to observe what the United States is heading to. So I think when it comes to Russia, the road ahead is much unclearer than when it comes to Iran and the stance from the United States when it comes to Nord Stream 2.
We're grateful to everyone who participated in this discussion today. Thank you all for joining us on this historic day, the Inauguration Day in the United States. I want to thank everyone who has tuned in so far and encourage you to stay with us, because I'm about to hand over to Stormy, and we're going to hear, of course, the inauguration address, and then I'll be back with another interesting panel responding to that address after Joe Biden has spoken. Thank you for now.
Thank you so much, Terry. And that's the cue. We are going live, CNN live stream the inauguration, just a few minutes to go, and stay tuned, and we'll continue. Thanks so much, Terry.
Thank you.
My fellow Americans, a moment we have all been waiting for. It is now my great privilege and high honor to be the first person to officially introduce the 46th President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden, Jr.
Chief Justice Roberts, Vice President Harris, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, Leader McConnell, Vice President Pence, my distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. This is America's day. This is democracy's day, a day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Through a crucible for the ages, America has been tested anew, and America has risen to the challenge. Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause of democracy. The people, the will of the people has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious, democracy is fragile, and at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. So now, on this hallowed ground where just a few days ago, violence sought to shake the Capitol's very foundation, we come together as one nation, under God, indivisible, to carry out the peaceful transfer of power as we have for more than 2 centuries. As we look ahead in our uniquely American way, restless, bold, optimistic, and set our sights on the nation we know we can be and we must be. I thank my predecessors of both parties for their presence here today. I thank them from the bottom of my heart. And I know the resilience of our Constitution and the strength of our nation, as does President Carter, who I spoke with last night, who cannot be with us today, but whom we salute for his lifetime in service. I've just taken the sacred oath each of those patriots have taken, the oath first sworn by George Washington. But the American story depends not on any one of us, not on some of us, but on all of us, on we, the people, who seek a more perfect union. This is a great nation. We are good people. And over the centuries, through storm and strife, in peace and in war, we've come so far. But we still have far to go. We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do in this winter of peril and significant possibilities. Much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain. Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we're in now. Once-in-a-century virus that silently stalks the country. It's taken as many lives in 1 year as America lost in all of World War II. Millions of jobs have been lost. Hundreds of thousands of businesses closed. A cry for racial justice, some 400 years in the making, moves us. The dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer. A cry for survival comes from the planet itself, a cry that can't be any more desperate or any more clear. And now, a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism, that we must confront and we will defeat. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America, requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity. In another January, on New Year's Day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, and I quote, "If my name ever goes down into history, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." My whole soul is in it. Today, On this January day, my whole soul is in this, bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause. Uniting to fight the foes we face: anger, resentment and hatred, extremism, lawlessness, violence, disease, joblessness, and hopelessness. With unity, we can do great things, important things. We can right wrongs. We can put people to work in good jobs. We can teach our children in safe schools. We can overcome the deadly virus. We can reward work and rebuild the middle class and make health care secure for all. We can deliver racial justice, and we can make America once again the leading force for good in the world. I know speaking of unity can sound to some like a foolish fantasy these days. I know the forces that divide us are deep and they are real. But I also know they are not new. Our history has been a constant struggle between the American ideal that we're all are created equal and the harsh, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart. The battle is perennial, and victory is never assured. Through Civil War, the Great Depression, World War, 9/11, through struggle, sacrifice, and setbacks, our better angels have always prevailed. In each of these moments, enough of us have come together to carry all of us forward. And we can do that now. History, faith, and reason show the way of unity. We can see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. We can treat each other with dignity and respect. We can join forces, stop the shouting, and lower the temperature. For without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness and fury. No progress, only exhausting outrage. No nation, only a state of chaos. This is our historic moment of crisis and challenge, and unity is the path forward. And we must meet this moment as the United States of America. If we do that, I guarantee you we will not fail. We have never, ever, ever, ever failed in America when we've acted together. And so today, at this time, in this place, let's start afresh, all of us. Let's begin to listen to one another again, hear one another, see one another, show respect to one another. Politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war. And we must reject the culture in which facts themselves are manipulated and even manufactured. My fellow Americans, we have to be different than this. America has to be better than this. And I believe America is so much better than this. Just look around. Here we stand in the shadow of the Capitol Dome, as was mentioned earlier, completed amid the Civil War, when the Union itself was literally hanging in the balance. Yet we endured. We prevailed. Here we stand, looking out on the great mall where Dr. King spoke of his dream. Here we stand where 108 years ago, at another inaugural, thousands of protesters tried to block brave women marching for the right to vote. And today, we mark the swearing in of the first woman in American history elected to national office, Vice President Kamala Harris. Don't tell me things can't change. Here we stand across the Potomac from Arlington Cemetery, where heroes who gave the last full measure of devotion rest in eternal peace. And here we stand, just days after a riotous mob thought they could use violence to silence the will of the people, to stop the work of our democracy, to drive us from this sacred ground. It did not happen. It will never happen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Not ever. To all those who supported our campaign, I'm humbled by the faith you've placed in us. To all those who did not support us, let me say this. Hear me out as we move forward. Take a measure of me and my heart. And if you still disagree, so be it. That's democracy. That's America. The right to dissent peaceably within the guardrails of our republic is perhaps this nation's greatest strength. Yet hear me clearly. Disagreement must not lead to disunion. And I pledge this to you. I will be a president for all Americans. All Americans. And I promise you, I will fight as hard for those who did not support me as for those who did. Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, a saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love. Defined by the common objects of their love. What are the common objects we as Americans love that define us as Americans? I think we know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth. Recent weeks and months have taught us a painful lesson. There is truth and there are lies. Lies told for power and for profit. And each of us has a duty and a responsibility as citizens, as Americans, and especially as leaders. Leaders who have pledged to honor our Constitution and protect our nation, to defend the truth and defeat the lies. Look, I understand that many of my fellow Americans view the future with fear and trepidation. I understand they worry about their jobs. I understand, like my dad, they lay at bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering, can I keep my health care? Can I pay my mortgage? Thinking about their families, about what comes next. I promise you, I get it. But the answer is not to turn inward, to retreat into competing factions, distrusting those who don't look like you, or worship the way you do, or don't get their news from the same sources you do. We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts, if we show a little tolerance and humility, and if we're willing to stand in the other person's shoes, as my mom would say, just for a moment, stand in their shoes. Because here's the thing about life. There's no accounting for what fate will deal you. Some days, when you need a hand. There are other days when we're called to lend a hand. That's how it has to be. That's what we do for one another. And if we are this way, our country will be stronger, more prosperous, more ready for the future. And we can still disagree. My fellow Americans, in the work ahead of us, we're going to need each other. We need all our strength to persevere through this dark winter. We're entering what may be the toughest and deadliest period of the virus. We must set aside politics and finally face this pandemic as one nation. One nation. And I promise you this, As the Bible says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. We will get through this together. Together. Look, folks, all my colleagues I serve with in the House and the Senate up here, we all understand the world is watching all of us today. So here's my message to those beyond our borders. America has been tested, and we've come out stronger for it. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's challenges. And we'll lead not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. We'll be a strong and trusted partner for peace, progress, and security. Look, you all know we've been through so much in this nation. And in my first act as president, I'd like to ask you to join me in a moment of silent prayer. Remember all those who we lost in this past year to the pandemic, those 400,000 fellow Americans, moms, dads, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, friends, neighbors, and coworkers. We'll honor them by becoming the people and the nation we know we can and should be. So I ask you, let's say a silent prayer for those who've lost their lives and those left behind, and for our country. Amen. Folks, this is a time of testing. We face an attack on our democracy and on truth, a raging virus, growing inequity, the sting of systemic racism, a climate in crisis, America's role in the world. Any one of these would be enough to challenge us in profound ways. But the fact is, we face them all at once, presenting this nation with one of the gravest responsibilities we've had. Now we're going to be tested. Are we going to step up, all of us? It's time for boldness, for there is so much to do. And this is certain. I promise you, we will be judged, you and I, by how we resolve these cascading crises of our era. We will rise to the occasion is the question. Will we master this rare and difficult hour? Will we meet our obligations and pass along a new and better world to our children? I believe we must. I'm sure you do as well. I believe we will. And when we do, we'll write the next great chapter in the history of the United States of America, the American story. A story that might sound something like a song that means a lot to me. It's called American Anthem. There's one verse that stands out, at least for me, and it goes like this. The work and prayers of century have brought us to this day. What shall be our legacy? What will our children say? Let me know in my heart when my days are through, America, America, I gave my best to you. Let's us add our own work and prayers to the unfolding story of our great nation. If we do this, then when our days are through, our children and our children's children will say of us, they gave their best, they did their duty, they healed a broken land. My fellow Americans, I close the day where I began, with the sacred oath. Before God and all of you, I give you my word. I will always level with you. I will defend the Constitution. I'll defend our democracy. I'll defend America. And I'll give all of you, keep everything I do in your service, thinking not of power, but of possibilities, not of personal interest, but the public good. And together, we shall write an American story of hope, not fear, of unity, not division, of light, not darkness, a story of decency and dignity, love and healing, greatness and goodness. May this be the story that guides us, the story that inspires us, and the story that tells ages yet to come that we answered the call of history. We met the moment. Democracy and hope, truth and justice did not die on our watch but thrived. That America secured liberty at home and stood once again as a beacon to the world. That is what we owe our forebears, one another, and generation to follow. So, with purpose and resolve, we turn to those tasks of our time, sustained by faith, driven by conviction, and devoted to one another and the country we love with all our hearts. May God bless America, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, America.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Garth Brooks to perform Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. If I can ask you to sing this last verse with me, not just the people here, but the people at home, at work, as one, united. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Welcome back to our inauguration event here at the State Representation Baden-Württemberg. In our event, Road to Election and Beyond. I hope you had time to refresh a little, because now it's going to go high speed through to some further interviews and then to our second panel discussion. I had the opportunity yesterday to talk to Soraya Sahadi Nelson, another really important transatlantic voice here in Berlin. She is the former director at KCRW Berlin, and she was a foreign correspondent with NPR here in Berlin. And let us hear what she has to say about the inauguration and what Biden is up to in the first hours and days of his presidency.
Together people from all 50 states, all the territories, and getting them to sort of join together in all of the challenges that need to be met.
We still have some technical problems with the stream, which
sort of united feel.
I would
but
then
we have
say,
to remember that
we changed
despite his best
a little
attempts,
bit
there
our
are
sequence,
still
if that is all right, because who I'm also already seeing is John Emerson. John, it's so nice to see you. Where are you currently?
Currently in Los Angeles with Kimberly and our girls, and it's somewhat of a bittersweet day for us because 4 years ago, we watched the inauguration from the seats of our Lufthansa flight, leaving Berlin and returning to Los Angeles. And I'll tell you, the difference in feeling in the Emerson family from that day to this day is profound.
Oh, I am sure. Everybody who does, I mean, I'm almost sure that almost everybody knows you, but those few who don't know you, this is John Emerson. He was I have to say, really beloved US ambassador here in Berlin because you did so much for the transatlantic relationship and the transatlantic community. And now you're a very, very strong voice within the transatlantic community. You are part of many boards of transatlantic institutions. So thank you so much being here today with you. When you watched the inaugural address right now, what were your feelings?
I think my profound feeling was gratitude. I think we have the right man for this challenging time in not just our nation's history, but in global history. I thought the speech was extraordinary. You know, it was honest and realistic, but it was compassionate and empathic, but it was also hopeful. And I really could not imagine a better speech for the time. And then I'll tell you, I don't know if you all got to see this, but the poet laureate, the young 22, 23-year-old woman who recited that poem at the end, I mean, that was just extraordinary. And sort of everybody hit the right notes. And I will say that a huge cheer went up from the entire Emerson family as we were sitting in our living room watching our friend Kamala Harris take the oath of office as the first woman, the first Black, the first South Asian woman or woman of South Asian descent to become Vice President of the United States. That was a big moment for us too.
It was a little bit of a, we would say in German, Gänsehaut-Moment, wasn't it?
Yeah.
A really thrilling, thrilling moment. Was there anything in the speech which surprised you?
You know, nothing surprised me because well, it didn't surprise me. I guess what surprised me was how you don't, in inaugural addresses tend to be all aspirational and sort of uplifting. And this was sort of a leveling speech in the sense of being very realistic about the challenges that we face. Today, I think you're going to see President Biden sign a number of executive orders to try to address the 4 challenges we face. We have the global challenge on COVID. We have the challenge of rebuilding our economy in the United States and globally. We have the challenge presented by climate change. And we have the challenge presented by racial inequality, you know, in this country. And he was just very straightforward about that. But what was interesting was, I'd say 75% of this speech was about unity, was about bringing us together, was about reaching out to those who didn't support him, for those who were perhaps skeptical, and saying, you know, give me the opportunity, hear me out. And I thought it was just so honest. And I can't recall an inaugural address that had that kind of personal leveling and honesty in it, which I thought was quite extraordinary.
I think, didn't he also say that honesty is really an important thing we have to underline right now in his speech? Wasn't this one of his themes as well?
No question about it. And you know, it goes to social media, it goes to the fact that we have, you know, all quote alternative facts, that the last 4 years have just been an extraordinary departure. As Barack Obama calls it, we face an epistemological crisis here in America, and probably globally. I'm sure we see some of that in Germany as well. And so for him to address that in a forthright manner in his speech, I think was quite powerful as well.
You just mentioned that Biden is planning a firework of executive orders right in the beginning of in the first hours of his presidency. You know, when he did his speech, I thought, it's already over? It was so fast. I thought he would go into those policy areas and tell us, I'm going to do X, Y, that in the first hours, and then he didn't.
Well,
can you explain
an
why?
inaugural address is different from a State of the Union address. In a State of the Union address, which he will be doing, I won't call it State of the Union, but he will, I guarantee you, within the first month, he'll have his first joint address to Congress. That's when you lay out the legislative agenda, the substantive agenda in quite amount of detail. But this is more of almost spiritual in a sense, aspirational, trying to encapsulate the moment and the hopes and fears of the nation and show us all the way forward. And that's the purpose, I think, of an inaugural address. So that's why you didn't hear that. But I will tell you, the plan of the administration is over the next 10 days to roll out a series of announcements and executive orders. And today, he will start by rejoining the Paris Climate Change Agreement and by eliminating the Muslim travel ban that was one of the first things that Trump imposed. So you'll begin to see this play out over the course of the next 10 days for sure. And then I think we'll shortly have a speech to a joint session of Congress that will do what you were maybe thinking might happen in this speech, which is really lay out in great detail the substantive agenda that he'll be looking for legislatively to both address COVID and get our economy back on track.
So what he is inheriting is a situation which is pretty dire. A society which is deeply divided, a COVID crisis which hasn't been handled really well, the economic recession. He's got so much on his plate. Will he be able to do all this, especially since Congress is also going to be busy with some other things going on right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, the timing, obviously, the impeachment trial and everything that President Biden needs to get done, including confirming his appointees to high office, his cabinet members and all, not one of which has been confirmed by now. That's highly unusual, by the way. When I was in the Bill Clinton White House on day one, we had literally, on this day, his entire cabinet was sworn in. And Barack Obama had something quite close to that, as did George H.W. Bush. So that is unusual, and there's a lot to get done. But you know, the good news is that he is appointing an administration and a White House staff of people who have a lot of experience, who've been around the block, who know the jobs that they're going into. And so I think there'll be a tremendous capacity to hit the ground running. And I am hopeful that his outreach to across the aisle, his historically proven ability to work with people in the Republican Party as well, will lead to some joint bipartisan efforts legislatively to address these challenges that we have. So can we get it done? Yeah. Will it take a lot of work? No question about it. Situation isn't exactly ideal, but we've got the right man for the job to bull through it.
That sounds really good and very almost optimistic and enthusiastic. And it's so nice to hear this here over on that side of the Atlantic and in Berlin. You know how we are. I mean, we are structural pessimists, I would say. And you hear a lot, well, the tone is going to be different, but the style is going to be different, but not so much the policies, because the restrictions are so big. So we shouldn't get overexcited and be ready to be disappointed. What would you tell Germans and also policymakers who say everything is going to stay the same?
Well, I think a couple of things. First of all, listen to what he said in his speech. He made very, very clear that he wants to restore America's relationship with its allies, of which Germany is right at the top of the list. And he wants to restore American leadership, not necessarily the way it was in the past, but American leadership in together trying to address or addressing the huge problems that we face. And I was struck by Tony Blinken, our good friend who is will soon be the Secretary of State, his confirmation hearing yesterday, where he said, United States of America will move forward with both confidence and humility. And humility and the recognition that we have a lot to do at home to rebuild trust abroad, and humility in the sense that these problems that we now face globally today, no one nation, even a nation as big and strong as the United States, can handle them alone. They're problems that need us all to come together and to address them. And I think that, of course, there are issues that we have that aren't going to go away. There are challenges, different views perhaps on how to deal with Russia, different views on Nord Stream, different views on, perhaps even on burden sharing. But unlike the last 4 years where it appeared that that was the only thing that defined the transatlantic relationship, in the coming administration, in the current administration, those will be issues, but the larger context by far will be all those things that we share in common. And the tone will be very much reflective of that. So I don't think things will stay the same. I think you'll see us reaching out quickly to work closely with our allies to jointly address these massive problems that we face, starting with things like climate change, like inequality in our economies, and like the need to, in a tougher sense, to deal with transnational terrorism and nuclear proliferation and all those issues as well. Yeah, some of the issues remain, but I think it will be a dramatically different feel and approach and working relationship than what we've seen in the last 4 years.
Well, thank you so much. We are recording this, and whenever I hear a pessimistic statement again, I'm just going to play John Emerson to them. One last question. Remember those TTIP negotiation times when you were here?
I sure do. That was a lot of work and some frustration, I might add.
And it was still a very positive project to work forward to, much more positive than the last 4 years. If you were to identify the 3 top projects for the transatlantic relationship, what would they be?
Well, I mean, we'll have to let Tony Blinken and President Biden do that. But I would imagine, you look at what was said during the course of the campaign. I found it striking that incoming Secretary of State Blinken said in a speech to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce about 2 or 3 months ago, probably now about 3 months ago during the campaign, that one of the first orders of business of a Biden administration would be to, quote, end the artificial trade wars with Europe. So I would think one order of business would be to try to figure out where we want to head in that direction, and to try to move forward and not get caught up in threats about imposing, massive tariffs on automobiles and that kind of thing, which is what we'd seen. So that would be a part of it. I think clearly in the national security realm, reinforcing our commitment to NATO, will be, and our working together with our allies, that will be a big piece of it. And then climate. In fact, climate may, be the first, as I mentioned earlier. It's the one of the first things that President Biden will do today is to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord agreement. That's probably the top area where you'll see outreach to our friends and allies across the Atlantic. And hey, let's get to work on this, because even what we talked about in Paris is too little too late. We need to move forward in a much bigger way from that. So I think you'll see that as well.
Thank you so much, John. One last question. When will we see you again in Berlin?
Well, it's tough. Kimberly and I have an apartment there, as you know, and we're both looking forward to getting back. Obviously, we're in this COVID time. Los Angeles and Berlin are probably in a pretty similar situation in terms of lockdown and all that. But I would hope we'd get out there this spring at worst. We would love to be there for the Munich Security Conference, which I gather is now, they're looking at perhaps April, late April timeframe for that. Wolfgang Ischinger will obviously make that decision, but would love to be back by then, if not sooner. And I guarantee you'll see both of us over the course of the year. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, John, for
Hopefully you can all come and visit us in Los Angeles.
We are on our way whenever this COVID crisis is over. Thank you so much for being here with us today virtually. This was John Emerson. He was the ambassador of the United States to Germany from 2013 to 2017. Thanks so much, John, for talking with us today. So we will do a second try with our interview with Soraya. Technic team, are we ready to go? Perfect. So Soraya Sahadi Nelson is with us today. She is a journalist, a long-term Berlin and German kenner, somebody who really knows German politics and the transatlantic relationship, and she is a former long-time Berlin correspondent for NPR. Thank you so much, Soraya, for joining us today.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Stormy.
Soraya, we wanted to talk with you about the inauguration.
Well, his campaign has already, or I should say his administration at this point, has already announced that it would be America United. And he does have that really big challenge ahead of him of trying to bring together the most divided United States we've seen, arguably, since the Civil War. So it's a very big challenge for him, and everything he will be doing, all the themes, it's a virtual program, and basically it's going to be bringing together people from all 50 states, all the territories, and getting them to sort of join together in all of the challenges that need to be met, be it COVID, be it immigration, be it the economy, most importantly. And so it's going to have that sort of united feel. But we have to remember that despite his best attempts, there are still tens of millions of Americans who just don't even agree that he should be president. And so the challenge is going to be a very stiff one for him to convince people to come together.
Thank you so much for explaining this. Tomorrow is usually a really important, it's also a very important today, tomorrow, but it will look very differently from inaugurations in the past. There will be no big parties, no big crowds, just a very different staged inauguration. And what do you think? How will it look like? And what will be the most important pictures the Biden team wants to project at this day tomorrow?
Well, the Biden team will want to show him being sworn in, to giving legitimacy to his presidency, which he very clearly won, but which again, tens of millions of people don't accept. But we will also see the images of the high fences of the of the thousands of troops that are going to be on the streets, National Guardsmen in uniform, preparing for what the FBI warns could be attacks. There will be counter demonstrations. So at the same time that we're going to see this very prestigious, very normal handing over of the guard, if you will, of Joe Biden being sworn in. We're going to see this sort of warlike images that we are just not used to in the United States. So it is going to be a very daunting day, I think, for all concerned.
And then he will start right away with policy making. So we heard a long list of executive orders, lots of things he wants to change. What do you think will be his main things in the first days and first 100 days of his administration?
I think on the first day alone, he's talking about rejoining the World Health Organization, about rescinding what's widely known as the Muslim ban to allow travel from Iran, Syria, and many other majority Muslim countries back into the United States, of rolling out his 100 million vaccines in the first 100-day plan, of rejoining the Paris Accord. There are scores of regulations that he wants to rescind, or that were rescinded, I should say, under President Trump, that are now going to be put back in place, including oversight of financial institutions, and of course his $1.9 trillion relief package, which still has to be discussed and voted on in Congress. But the focus there is to make sure that Americans stay afloat, and that the full employment specter that existed in America before the pandemic, that returns. And it's going to be very interesting to see how he manages all of these things. I mean, it sounds like many long nights.
Many long nights, but you sound optimistic and you sound enthusiastic listening to you. So one important question, and I would like to end our interview with this, is do you believe that President Joe Biden will be able to reunite, to heal the country?
I am less optimistic on that point, to be honest with you. I think there are so many things that need to happen, but what I do think can help with that is if he has successes with all of his plans, and if they are visible and felt by a majority of Americans quickly, then I think the healing will in fact begin.
Well, thank you so much, Soraya. This was Soraya Sahadi Nelson, explaining to us what we should expect on Inauguration Day and the first 100 days. Thank you so much, Soraya.
Thank you. Talk soon. Take care, Stormy.
Thank you. So we are back, and it's my pleasure again to hand over to Terry for our next discussion round.
Thank you very much, Stormy. If you are just joining us now, by the way, we are in a significant session dealing with Joe Biden's inauguration today. We have two panels. We had one before the inauguration. We're having another one after the panel, and that's about to start right now. We have 5 representatives of the transatlantic community joining us here at the state representation of Baden-Württemberg in Berlin, joining us virtually, of course, in this corona time. But we have now heard Joe Biden's speech, and we're going to respond to that, what was said, what wasn't said, and we will also hear from our speakers talking about their expectations, their hopes, their fears for the next 4 years for the United States and the prospects for renewing transatlantic bonds. So allow me to introduce our 5 guests without further ado. Daniel Benjamin is president of the American Academy in Berlin. He served as ambassador at large and coordinator for counterterrorism at the U.S. State Department from 2002 to 2012. He was on the staff of the National Security Council several years and was a foreign policy speechwriter to President Bill Clinton. Important experience for what we're talking about today. Martin Sebastian Abel is director of the public affairs consultancy MSL Germany, and he's a board member of the Freundeskreis America House NRW, North Rhine-Westphalia. He served a term in North Rhine-Westphalia's parliament where he was a Green Party speaker on budget and finance. We also have with us Nina Hassel, colleague of mine, head and TV editor-in-chief of the German public broadcaster ARD, Capital City Studios here in Berlin. From 2012 to 2015, she was the ARD's bureau chief and chief correspondent in Washington, D.C. We also have Warren Marine, a warm welcome to you, a treasurer of the American Chamber, the treasurer of the American Chamber of Commerce in Germany, and partner of the auditing and advisory firm KPMG Germany, where he heads the U.S. Capitals Group. Exactly. Christian Schmidt is also with us. A great pleasure, as always. A member of the German Parliament, the Bundestag, representing Bavaria's center-right CSU Party. He's a former federal minister. Many of you may remember him from that post. He now serves on the Bundestag's Foreign Affairs Committee. He's also president of the German Atlantic Association. So first, a warm welcome to all of you for joining us. We're going to first get your responses to Joe Biden's speech, and then we're going to get into the discussion as such. We have about just over 50 minutes for this, so let's start with you, Daniel Benjamin. You were a speechwriter for a U.S. president yourself. What's your impression of Joe Biden's speech?
I always expect that speakers are going to bring their best game on the day of an inauguration, but I have to say I was really surprised and deeply impressed and deeply moved by President Biden's speech. I thought it was outstanding. I thought it was outstanding because it was Bidenism distilled. It was, he doesn't go for the kind of soaring rhetoric necessarily that Barack Obama went for, and yet his authenticity is really kind of overwhelming. And he deployed that authenticity in a really effective way. It was a speech of restoration. It was a speech that reconnected the American public, I think, with the American citizenry, with a whole host of ideals, a vision of what America should be. It was a speech you could have imagined perhaps Jimmy Stewart giving in one of his movies from the 30s or the 40s, or Henry Fonda. It really, the language was simple, it was direct. I had a lot of fears about emphasizing the theme of unity, given what we have seen in recent weeks and indeed the last 4 years, and yet he did it perfectly, establishing it not in some phony way. In fact, what surprised me was how direct he was about some of the threats we face, including, he said it explicitly, white supremacy and domestic terrorism. But he talked about collectives and about unity all the time, and about ideals. With unity, we could do great things, important things, right wrongs, put people to work in good jobs, teach our children in safe schools, overcome a deadly virus, deliver racial justice, and so on. So I thought it was, as John Emerson said, the right speech, the right man, the right time. And I was really, surprised and, again, deeply moved.
Thank you. So we've heard distilled, talking about authenticity, a Jimmy Stewart moment, as it were. So we've got one take on it. I'd like to get the rest of you to weigh in as well. We're just going to go through with the other four speakers. Martin Sebastian Abel, what struck you about Joe Biden's speech?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This was for sure one of these goosebump moments when you're looking for opportunity. Where can I sign to become an American? And all the presidents, despite the now former presidents, appeal to unity, trying to unify Americans. Bush 41 said he wanted a kinder America. Also, Bush 43 said he wanted to, change the tone in Washington. And of course, Barack Obama, the 44th president, with his famous, there's no liberal, no conservative America, but only the United States of America. And here's Joe Biden referring to Abraham Lincoln, who entered the presidency in the maybe most gravest history of America. And this shows you how certain Joe Biden thinks the division in America is, and unity was all over the place, was the motto. As a European, I also appreciated that he said there's so much to restore, and he pointed out the alliances. America is back as a leader, and I'm really looking forward to this as a transatlanticist, that we can challenge the great challenges we're all facing worldwide, not only the pandemic, but climate, security, together with the United States. And I think America's back now.
America is back. Okay, well, that's a statement. Tina Hassel, what was your impression?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the two colleagues speaking before me. I think I was deeply fascinated by this speech because it was way more than just reaching across the aisle and trying to unify the country. It was, in my sense, a call for action as well, and some kind of invitation for democracy. And for me, it was very strong as a European when President Biden was talking about time of testing and then speaking about democracy, the pandemic, and all those big challenges that we join on both sides of the Atlantic. And so I think this was really a very strong speech and a very unusual, and I still have that goosebump moment.
Goosebump moment. We've heard that, I think, 3 times now today. It apparently did make quite an impression, Joe Biden's speech. Warren Marine, you have an interesting role on this panel. You've lived and worked in Germany for over 20 years now, but you are an American from Texas, and you identify as Republican. How did Biden's speech resonate with you?
Well, thank you for that, and thanks for very honored to be able to be on this panel today. You mentioned that I identify as Republican. I would put that in the past tense. I identified as Republican prior to the last 4 years, just to set the record straight. I have to agree with the other speakers. I was moved by it. I thought it was the right message at the right time. It was aspirational. The issue of unity is clearly something that I think most people understand is going to be very difficult, but it was the right aspirational message to put out there and to work towards. I thought it was perfect that he made a specific statement to the international community that's already been referred to by a couple of the other speakers, mentioning that we have been tested and we've come out stronger. And yet, I believe he said we have come out stronger, not that we will come out stronger. So it was a very direct message, and also that there's a clear expectation that we're going to repair our alliances that have gone into disrepair, unfortunately, in the last 3 or 4 years. So from that perspective, it was right message, right time. Completely agree with that. He didn't say, other than that, give too much specificity about what to expect from a business economic perspective, mostly because he was focused largely on the most immediate threat, which is the COVID pandemic. And I think he's absolutely right with that we have to address that first and foremost, and everything else will fall into line after that if we do that right.
The right message at the right time. Christian Schmidt, do you feel the same way? What were you listening for in the speech, and what did you hear or not hear?
Thank you. I was very impressed because he made me in some moments forgetting about his predecessor, about Trump, and maybe beyond the situation that seeing this very high time of the American U.S. society sampling or rallying around the Congress, not having the outgoing president here, it probably is the single time that this was right. And what we missed so much is confidence and trust. And I got the idea and the impression that this was the real Joe Biden, with his commitment of values and with his not tactical approach, but the understanding that it's very important to go back to basic values, and they are including a commitment of the United States on the international level, more than we have seen. So it's, I do not know whether it's good to say this now, but there's a very simple German wording to say, do you trust anybody? Would you buy a used car from him? So simple it sounds, but it gives the basis for confidence. And this is very, very necessary. That's the coin which has to be paid in politics these days in these divided societies. And I assume that this was a kind of, indeed, making, should I say, a new deal, in understanding that this is a deal of respecting the other. If it will not be the last decision or the presentation to be made, because I think there are some challenges which cannot be answered only by the speech. But without the speech, I think the challenges can never be answered. So I think it's a good first step, and respect. This was not a politician, this was the president.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for your initial responses to the speech. I want to broaden the discussion out a bit now and have you reflect on the challenges that Joe Biden faces, both domestically and internationally, and how those may be related. Many say that Joe Biden is inheriting a country where democracy is broken, a country whose social fabric has been torn, and that putting the country back together again under these circumstances, with a pandemic raging, with the economic impact of that, and with what many feel is widespread inequality and racial injustice in the country, is going to hamper him in anything he does. Daniel Benjamin, you know Washington well. You know the United States from both sides of the Atlantic. What's your impression of the challenges that Joe Biden faces trying to heal the nation, to restore the soul of the nation, as you said? You described his speech as restorative. Do you think that's going to be possible?
Joe Biden comes to office facing more challenges than any president, certainly since Franklin Roosevelt in the depth of the Depression in 1933, and possibly since Abraham Lincoln in 1861, when the Union was falling apart. He does so with a bare majority in the Senate and a decent majority in the House of Representatives, and a deeply divided country. A lot will depend on the internal strife that is taking hold in the Republican Party. A lot will depend on events and whether or not we face a protracted experience with extreme right-wing violence. And some will depend on the international environment. I have to believe that they are going to go as hard as they can at the pandemic and at the accompanying economic crisis. They've already been sharing some of their plans for how they're going to do it. I think it's safe to say that the pandemic is finally going to get the serious attention that it deserves through the use of legal authorities and that have not been used before, and really trying to get the vaccine out to people and getting lots more medical workers into the field to do what is necessary. Joe Biden is also an Atlanticist and an international relations person to his fingertips, so he's not going to do all domestic policy, but he's going to have a challenge on his hands finding the bandwidth to do what he wants to internationally. I think that the returning to the Paris Accords is very important, but also important in itself, but important symbolically, because it represents essentially a pledge to the international community that the United States is going to be a responsible stakeholder again. And the same is true for rejoining the World Health Organization, which the administration is also going to do on day one. So enormous amount on the plate. Very difficult circumstances, but a better start than might have otherwise been the case, especially as we look at a Washington with 25,000 troops stationed there to protect the inauguration.
Indeed. I do want to get into the foreign policy aspects in a moment, but because Joe Biden is facing such a huge domestic challenge in uniting the nation, which was the key theme of his speech, it should be said, and dealing with the pandemic, of course, I want to ask each of you, too, to maybe just reflect on that particular challenge, on on assuring that democracy is not endangered in the United States and trying to heal the nation. I'd like to ask you right away, Warren Marine. I'm going to, if I see we've got somebody, we've actually got Mr. Abel on the screen right now. There's Warren. Great. Warren, how do you see what Joe Biden is trying to do in reaching out to heal the nation, to those people who may feel disenfranchised, to Trump supporters who may still really believe that the election was stolen from them?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. I think that is something that's, quite frankly, just going to take time. And there are some that I don't believe he'll ever be able to reach, honestly speaking. And from my perspective, the best way to combat that is to execute on all the other things that have to be done, and ensure that the economy gets turned in the right direction, which I think will reap benefits for everybody in the society. And I think a lot of the people on the right, on the Republican side, are really focused on their personal economic situation. They've been told a lot of things that, for the large part, are not true during the election. That electing Biden as president was going to turn us into a socialist state in the U.S., et cetera, et cetera. And quite frankly, at this point, the only way to combat all of that is to just prove that all to be wrong and to do the opposite. And I think a lot of the things that have been put forward are going in the right direction, thinking in the right direction. And we'll just have to wait and see whether or not the administration is successful in executing on them. I think if they do, they'll really be able to take a big step in the right direction in regards to that issue.
Martin Sebastian Abel, I'm interested in your perspective as a relatively young man in your, what are you, mid-30s at this point. You've been involved in a number of exchange programs with the United States. You understand the culture of the cultural exchange that's going on between Germany and the United States. Do you feel that there, in the younger generation in the United States, there might be more willingness to accept the hand that Joe Biden is reaching out right now, also to the center right?
I'm sure hope so, Terry, unless I'm not really sure if he's going to be successful. There had been so much division, not only in the past 4 years, but a long history of disinformation, targeting especially more rural areas. Joe Biden said in his inauguration speech, there's a big difference between the metropolitan cities and the more rural areas. I witnessed this in my first trip to Iowa. And I also witnessed that topics like migration are seen very difficult in smaller towns. We've been to a city in Iowa where the main languages in schools are Spanish, and also police is looking for Spanish law enforcement. So I hope that this will be the core to restore. And also, I agree with Warren completely. Joe Biden knows he has to deliver. He pointed already out a 1.9 trillion restoring program, bringing out paychecks to every American over $1,000. And also, he will try to get a vaccine program running to fight the pandemic with 11 million Americans and unemployed. This is maybe one of the most pressuring tasks he's facing. And I agree, when he delivers, he can build on this and regain trust, he said, with his soul and heart.
When you work for a public relations company, crisis communications is part of your job. What would you say to the Biden administration? What advice would you give them at this point in trying to heal the nation?
Oh, that's a tough one. I would say crisis is the ultimate point that defines maybe the whole presidency. And if he will be successful in successful in tackling the COVID-19 crisis, with 400,000 Americans dead, 400,000 persons missing on the table. This is really something to build on and restore on, and also restoring and reaching a hand, so to say, to those who didn't vote for him, as he did in his inauguration speech, is really the point to start. There's no switch you can turn that people will trust you. You have to build this, and this needs time, and this needs maybe the transformal leadership he refers to with Abraham Lincoln. And history will show if it's successful. I surely hope so.
Tina Hassel, you've spent time in Washington. You followed American politics closely. You're also a journalist. You're a colleague of mine, and perhaps like you felt attacked when Donald Trump described the media as the enemy of the people. We're seeing a media landscape in the United States right now that is driving the polarization in the country to some degree. How do you see that landscape evolving during the Biden presidency? And do you think that there are any hopes for reining that in and agreeing on a common set of facts, on a common reality, as it were?
Well, I think that the common threat and the common challenges can bring the United States and Europe and Germany, as I'm speaking for as a German correspondent, bring them closer together, because it's not just watching what the partner is going through or being very relieved and optimistic today that that the democracy prevailed and that the institutions showed proof that they are strong. I think this common threat is something that can really be a kind of wake-up call. And I can tell you and assure you that what happened in January 6th at the Capitol was really something that really shocked and shattered German politicians, European politicians, and public at the same time, because they were all watching it like, wow, this is something. While everything we have very different conditions, talking about media, talking about politics, but this was an attack to democracy and institutions all over, and it's about to make the West work and make the West be resilient. So I'm quite optimistic. I can feel, and I do know that here in Germany, that was a wake-up call, and I think here on this side of the Atlantic, it is really an understanding that we Europeans really have to work very fast to make and do everything that the Biden administration can be successful, that we can altogether prove in this competition of systems that our multilateral approach can be more effective than an American first or national approach, and that our way of institutions prove more resilient. And I think this is something which really everyone understood here, that if we're talking about transatlantic reconciliation, we will have to think it about as a two-way effort, and that we have to really act very strongly to not just take the hand, but really come and not come empty-handed, and to offer something. And I think I'm quite optimistic on that side.
Okay, Christian Schmidt, when you were listening to Joe Biden speak just then, and he referred to some of the divisions in the country. He talked about politics in general as well. And one could contrast what Joe Biden said with what Donald Trump said during his inauguration speech, where Trump talked about carnage in America and that he was going to end that. We heard Joe Biden say, politics doesn't have to be a raging fire destroying everything in its path. That's kind of the impression one gets of what's been happening in America the past 4 years. Do you see do you see, how do you see the prospects for not making politics a raging fire in the United States over these coming years? Do you think that's going to be something Joe Biden can achieve?
If anybody, I think personalities like Joe Biden and Joe Biden personally could do. But what it's about? I think it's about reconciliation, not only of having this split society, which we just sometimes as Europeans are looking on as something very strange. On the other side, we would expect that this healed society will be another kind of a European society. It will not be. And we have to realize on our side that the tools to heal and to heal what is somehow very different and somehow very similar. What is similar? I think basically we are living in a time where we have a gap between globalization and in all issues, and not only media, in technology and in pandemics. And on the other side, we have a strong commitment of being local, regional, national. Trump used this very simply with a blunt approach, and not healing, but not only not healing, but ensuring the possibilities of the country. Biden has to try to reconcile globalization and those following a liberal idea of the future world, and combine it with a regional understanding identity. This is similar to European understanding, and but I see that this is it's a double reconciliation, which is very, very, very challenging. Not only about the regional, the greater agglomerations and the land, the belt, the Rust Belt, or the agriculture, but it is about try to get an understanding how we could go forward in this time of global challenges, not forgetting the climate change. So if this is where we can draw some profit from Joe Biden's position and commitment, but we Europeans, we have to learn that the second way to try to reconcile the disunited America, to take a word from Arthur Schlesinger. This is something which is an American issue, and we have to see as a region where normally we say in a time of 5 years later, we're getting some of the social situations in our own society to see and to work, not to have such a split society where we are just starting in our country to have already the first signs of such an attitude as well. So it's challenging not only for Biden, but it's challenging as well.
That's an important point to make about the idea that is very widespread in Germany, that developments in the United States eventually end up penetrating German society as well. That's something I've heard a lot over the past 30 years that I've been living in Germany myself. So I know that there are people in Germany and the rest of Europe too were looking aghast at some of the polarization that they observed in the U.S. So I think we all agree that Joe Biden faces a tough task trying to heal the nation, trying to achieve the unity that he was so aspirational about in his speech today. I do want to talk specifically about some of the foreign policy challenges and how the transatlantic relationship might evolve positively under Biden, what the potential is for that. And I would go back to you, Daniel Benjamin. We saw during the confirmation hearing yesterday for Joe Biden's nominee, Antony Blinken, for Secretary of State, we heard the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee describing the world as being on fire. And we recognize that there are major foreign policy obstacles that the Biden administration will be facing. Do you feel that there is the capacity within the Biden administration to repair some of the damage that has been done, that he talked about restoring America's place in the world? That's one part of it, but there's also the practical part of putting the State Department back together in a way that allows it to function in accordance with Biden's wishes and to get everyone on board to push for that. How do you see the potential for that, given the major domestic challenges that Biden has? Will he have attention for that? Will he be able to get the mechanics right?
Well, a series of great questions. And what I'd like to do is first address the question about capacity and then maybe turn back a bit to what the previous speakers were talking about, the domestic challenge, just very briefly. So there's no question that the State Department needs to be rebuilt. And in fact, an enormous amount of our bureaucracy needs to be rebuilt because so many capable civil servants, foreign service officers and the like have left in the last few years. And we don't know all the numbers yet, but the situation is quite serious. But on the plus side of things, I shared an office with Tony Blinken for 3 years when we were both writing speeches for Bill Clinton, and Jake Sullivan is a good friend. And I think that this is an extraordinary team that has been assembled, possibly the strongest foreign policy team in many administrations. They're also strengthened by the fact that they have the complete confidence of the president. This is not a team of rivals brought in from far outside the Beltway or from many different walks of life. These are people who've been working together closely, who share a vision, and also who are very good at putting aside their egos and really can roll up their sleeves and get stuff done. So I'm quite optimistic about the team. The world is a difficult place. We've talked a lot about climate as being a huge issue. It is a huge issue for Americans. Comparably significant will be the issue of China and of building an alliance of like-minded countries in dealing with China. So there are a lot of big issues. Returning to the JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear deal, will be important. Ending the misery in Yemen will be important. Reassuring our allies, not only in Europe, but also in East Asia, will be vitally important. Dealing with a global pandemic, ensuring that vaccines are distributed to countries that couldn't pay for huge shipments to begin with will also be a big deal. So there's a lot there. I found the conversation before fascinating. I just wanted to say this. America is divided into different informational universes now, different cognitive universes. And it is really going to be difficult to break down those barriers between the world in which Fox viewers and One American Network viewers are. And those are the ones that are supporting the 145 congressmen who voted to overturn the election. This is going to be the challenge of the era. Additionally, because it hasn't been said, a lot of what motivated Trump voters was the fear of the browning of America and the demographic changes that are going on. And that is an enormous issue. And for Biden to create unity, he somehow has to convince those people that the pie is expanding and that they are getting benefits as well, and that we really are out of many one, e pluribus unum, because that problem is so elemental right now that there's no avoiding it, and that will be a big challenge for the new administration.
We're talking about some of there's a relationship, obviously, between domestic politics and international politics, but focusing, again, more specifically on the international dimension. Christian Schmidt, you understand how the relationship, the transatlantic relationship, is being laid out. What potential do you see for Joe Biden to overcome some of the obstacles that are currently on the table with the transatlantic relationship, be it regarding NATO, the whole question of security, be it trade with China, or even with Germany specifically, the North Stream pipeline project?
Thank you. Joe Biden, I remember very well, was as vice president, he announced TTIP, and it should launch some closer cooperation in economic and somehow political relations transatlantically. So we will not come back to this, but I think we have to try to make a new attempt to reorganize our economic cooperation, especially looking to the Chinese challenge. So there is some understanding. I think that there's a possibility. I expect that he will as well work on the issue of relations to Russia. The Russian Federation has done a lot of things which are not acceptable, including especially the Crimea issue. But I think there we have had a lack of back channels, a lack of possibility of just a double approach, talking and being very committed. So I could imagine that this is one of the important issues President Biden could do. And the second is indeed to try to get the security structure of NATO reformed. We have now had this commission which has presented its proposals. It is now on NATO to think about a new strategic approach, and it will be very important how far we see that there's responsibility of NATO for responsibility, as Richard Lugar said in his times, go out, NATO will go out of area or go out of business. It's not this out of area in the times of Richard Lugar, but it's the need of understanding that there is a global security responsibility, as President Biden has announced in his article in, I think, beginning of this year in Foreign Affairs, where he talked about this idea of the alliance of democracies. So he includes values, and that's very complicated to have this in Asia integrated. But this should be the basis of cooperation. He will challenge us Europeans in terms of commitment to NATO. And let me be open, in my country, it is not that everybody beyond the idea that Trump is off is now committed to support the success of transatlantic relations. I think we have to work inside, and this will be one of the issues in the electoral campaign this year. I'm very happy that the European Union, Jean-Michel and Borrell, they have made gave some ideas and proposals of getting a kind of new deal. I haven't said anything about Nord Stream 2. Okay, maybe we cool it down a little bit. It has not the strategic challenge seen some in the US, but it's something that we have to talk about energy supply full, not only in this case, in future after oil peak time and in the times of renewable energy necessary for climate change. So that's another thing. I would not see that Nord Stream is indeed it's a strategic decision to have a transatlantic cooperation, yes or not.
Okay.
But it is a part.
Martin Sebastian Aber, you said in your first initial remarks that listening to Joe Biden's speech made you feel that you wanted to become an American, that you would, where can I sign up to become an American? So the vision that Joe Biden laid out in his inauguration speech you found very appealing. But during the presidency of Donald Trump, opinion polls show that the opinion of the United States in Europe, and specifically in Germany, has dropped to negative points never seen before since the Second World War. Do you think that that other people in Europe will warm up to Joe Biden? Do you think that that damage can be undone so quickly?
I sure hope so, and that's also part of the mission of America House. Not only starting now, but in the past 4 years and beyond, to strengthen the relationship, to create exchange, not only on politics or defense or strategy formed foreign policy, but culture. And I think the cultural bonds are very deep, and there's a vivid exchange going on. And I hope we will overcome COVID to have some of the exchange possibilities, especially for younger people, back on I was part of many exchange programs, and I benefited from it to see the US not only on the coast, but on the insides, that's in the heartland, so to say. And I think Körber Stiftung recently did a representative poll, and I think above 80% says yes, the relationship worsened through the now former presidency, but will restore. And it's our goal as a transatlantic community to re-strengthen those ties and to exchange. And also, I'd like to add that I see many possibilities where we can work together as Europeans with the US. And one topic is for sure the challenge of climate change and climate mitigation. With the Green Deal and the climate protection laws the European Union passed in the very last year, we now have common goals against. The goals of the Green Deal from Joe Biden are almost compatible to what the European Union formulated. And why not start a new era of climate diplomacy? Also artificial intelligence. We are Europeans, especially we Germans, we are very good in setting rules and frameworks. Why not work together on trustworthy AI and bring something new to refresh our relationship, our friendship with the United States? You just
mentioned a very important word, and that is trust. That is what has suffered so much in the transatlantic relationship. Many are saying that given the transition from Obama to Trump, that this was such a shock to the system for many on this side of the Atlantic that it's going to be hard to restore trust, because maybe Trump will come back in another 4 years, or someone like him. There's a great deal of concern about that. Tina Hassel, you've been watching all of this. You understand the importance of soft power. You've been watching the relationship between the United States and Germany evolve very closely as a political correspondent here in Berlin. How do you see that soft power relationship evolving moving forward? Sure, there are issues like climate change where the cooperation may be possible, but do you think that sort of trust can be restored?
Yeah, I'm quite optimistic. I know that trust has been damaged. We have several polls showing this, but I really agree that the cultural bond is very deep. And I mean, to be honest, nothing is so attractive than success. So I think we should, of course, cherish our common values, but should go ahead and not only talk about common values, but to prove that there is common actions and hopefully common success as well. And I would not, or I would emphasize that climate change can be something like that, some kind of EU transatlantic climate bridge, not only because it's a very huge challenge, but because it's something really moving young people here in Germany. Then I think talking about a kind of competition of systems is something that young people here they understand that we are in that different kind of systems are challenged. And so if we can prove that the Western system as a whole is successful and show this in starting trade deals, talks again, really showing that EU and Germany, including, is less naive versus China. I think foreign policy here in Germany towards China is moving a lot, and we are not only talking about 5G, but that maybe we can find a common approach, really dealing with China can be something very concrete and something which can restore trust. And of course, talking about the capability of defense. We talked about NATO. Right now, here in Germany, it's a little bit difficult to only talk about the 2% goal. But if we put it more, and I think the Biden administration will do that, of talking less about the 2% goal, and meaning about defense spending, but talking about capability and what we can do as Europeans and as Germans for our own near neighborhood. I think as soon as this all can be concrete and successful in a way, we can restore trust quite easily, because right now we are talking about Navalny, seeing about what's happening in Russia. We are talking less naive about China. So I think there is a lot of common points, but to underline, unfortunately, time is short, not only because Joe Biden doesn't have a lot of time to prove that, but because we are going into elections, and after us, we have elections this year, and next year it's France having elections as the two leading countries. So I think it has to be concrete and successful, and then we can, I am sure, restore trust quite quickly.
You said it, Tina, we don't have much time. Indeed, we only have about 5 minutes left. So I'd like to invite each of you to just make a final remark about your expectations and hopes for the Biden administration. If you could formulate just 1, 2, maybe 3 very quick ideas that you would put to the Biden administration for how the transatlantic relationship might be improved during his presidency, I would really appreciate that. Really, just a couple of sentences. We'll start back at the top with Daniel Benjamin.
Gosh, tough one. So I think that it would be, one, important to deliver on promises regarding climate, because that confers a lot of legitimacy to the European public, and to really seek out a very wide-ranging dialogue on China. And then the toughest part of all, I think, is to try to deal with concerns along the lines you mentioned, which is that if there was Trump before, there could be Trump again afterwards. And I think the biggest danger in the relationship right now is that Europeans will hedge. And there's a poll out from the European Council on Foreign Relations that indicates very low trust in the United States and a deep desire to kind of stand to the side when it comes to China. So I think those are really the big issues that need to be focused on.
Very much so. That European Council on Foreign Relations report, I think it began with the line, Americans have chosen a new president, but not a new country, which I thought was very insightful. Martin Sebastian Abel, what would you put on that list?
Well, America First is gone. At least it's not spoken out loudly anymore. So many things that are important for both Europe and the US will remain the same. And I hope we Europeans are up for this and see the chances this new administration brings for us. We talked about climate change and trustworthy AI. These are really good ways to start over and to reinforce the transatlantic partnership. And as I pointed out, also exchange is crucial. And as soon as COVID will overcome, which is also maybe a good mission for Europe and the US, not only with American, European developed vaccines, but also with pulling our strengths together.
Okay.
It would be really great to see the exchange going on and talking and yeah.
Okay, talking is absolutely a good idea. We can certainly hope that there will be a lot more dialogue across the Atlantic. Tina Hassel, very briefly, what can be done? What are your top priorities for rebuilding the transatlantic relationship?
Very briefly, to prove from both sides that a joint approach and partnership is working and is more successful than every country going by its own. And very briefly and concrete, President Biden's first trip comes to Europe, the G7, and that Europe and the US will then, and the G7 will already agree on a very concrete and specific new goal.
Very good. Warren Marine, your priorities for rebuilding the transatlantic relationship? Sorry, I think your mic might be off.
Right. As I've said before, the number one priority is to get control of the pandemic. I believe once we get that behind us, there's going to be no stopping the economic rebound that will occur as a result. I think that view is shared by many in the business world and the economic world. My view that him being elected is going to be very positive on the transatlantic business relationship is shared by our members. We did a survey right after the election, and 90% plus were of that view. And if we get it right with if the administration and the U.S. is able to get it right dealing with the pandemic, there's not going to be any stopping the economy, which has significant pent-up demand. There's plenty of capital available in the market. Last year in 2000, we saw a doubling of the number of IPOs and had more IPOs last year in the US than in the 21 years before that. And so there's a lot of money waiting to be invested and looking for the right investment. And if we get the transatlantic business relationship back on track, some of that money will also flow into Germany and Europe.
Good business prospects there, it sounds like. And finally, Christian Schmidt, a final word for you, priorities for building the transatlantic relationship.
Thank you. Priorities would be that we are working again to set the standards international globally. We've lost the trace. Chinese standards, Asian standards are more than European and American, has to be restored in economic and also on the level of values. And the second, a little bit European looking, we are far off, but we have settled the situation in the eastern part of our continent and the relations there, including down to Turkey. So I think with jointly, we will be able to set a new framework for the peaceful development.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all of you, all five of you, for joining us today on this very important, this historic day, if I may say. And I'd like to just close by, first of all, thanking the Aspen Institute for having me here today, and thanking all of the organizations whose logos you see behind me. And I want to just leave you with a few quotes, just a few words from Joe Biden's speech that have stuck in my mind. Just a number of words. These words are hope, resolve, democracy, unity, dignity, respect, tolerance, and indeed humility. Thank you very much. Stormy.
Thank you so much. That was too fast to write it down, but thank you so much. Yeah, I need that piece of paper. Thank you so much, Terry, for leading us through this day today. As always, we asked the right questions, just perfect. I also want to thank the state representation of Baden-Württemberg again. This has been an amazing day, and not just an amazing day, it was an amazing road to election and beyond. I also want to thank our partners again for not just being here today, but for traveling this road together with us. And to our audience out there who we can't unfortunately see, but we know and hope that you are there. Thank you so much for joining us. You know what? In these kind of virtual conferences and meetings, you never see how much work goes into it, how much excitement, how much fear if it's going to turn out all right with the technical glitches. And you can see the team who takes such an effort in preparing this. And so this is the moment where I want to ask my ESFIN team to come up here with masks and with a safety distance, just to say and send you off into the evening. And this is them. This is, we wouldn't be here without them. Thank you so much, team. And give our audience out there a big wave. And goodbye. See you soon.